I'll make the grand jury believe you did everything.
I think it's finally time for closure.
Jaren Hunter, FBI.
Hands where we can see them.
Sitting across our pristine dining table, watching his lips form those cruel words, realization struck with violent clarity. He dismissed 15 years of marriage as irritating background noise. That exact second, a switch flipped. Disappearing wasn't just an emotional reaction. It became an absolute, desperate necessity for survival. Silence is rarely empty. Most people think of silence as an absence, a void where sound should be. But in a marriage that is actively dying, silence is heavy. It has a texture, a weight, a suffocating presence that sits on your chest while you try to sleep next to a stranger. For the last 3 years of my marriage to Jaren Hunter, our home in the affluent suburbs of Chicago had been drowning in this heavy, suffocating silence. We had the perfect facade. Jaren was a senior partner at a boutique logistics and freight firm, bringing in the kind of money that afforded us a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial house, 2 luxury cars, and a country club membership we barely used. I ran a moderately successful interior design business, curating beautiful spaces for wealthy clients who often hid their own miserable lives behind expensive Italian leather sofas and imported marble countertops. We were the quintessential modern success story. But behind the custom mahogany doors of our home, we were 2 ghosts haunting the same hallways. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in late October. The weather outside was dismal, a relentless freezing rain that lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our dining room. I had spent the entire day in a state of quiet devastation. My younger sister, a woman who had been my rock since our parents passed away, had just been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The news had shattered my world. I had spent hours in the hospital waiting room, holding her hand, trying to project a strength I absolutely did not feel. When I finally came home, I was a raw, exposed nerve, desperate for the one thing a husband is supposed to provide: comfort. Jaren arrived home late, as usual. He walked through the door smelling of rain, expensive scotch, and that crisp, sterile scent of the corporate world. He didn't ask about my day. He didn't notice my red, swollen eyes. He simply tossed his leather briefcase onto the entryway bench, loosened his silk tie, and sat down at the dining table with his laptop, immediately plunging into a spreadsheet. I served dinner a roasted chicken I had managed to pull out of the oven purely on autopilot. I sat across from him. I needed to talk. I needed him to look at me and tell me that everything was going to be all right, that we would help my sister through this, that we were a team. Jaren, I started, my voice trembling slightly. I got the results back from Sarah's biopsy today. It's not good. The oncologist thinks they need to schedule surgery by next week, and I'm just so terrified. I kept talking, detailing the medical jargon, the fears, the logistics of how I would need to step back from my design firm to help care for her. I spoke for maybe 3 uninterrupted minutes. Jaren didn't look up. His eyes remained locked on the glowing screen of his MacBook. His fingers continued to tap rhythmically against the keys. Jaren, are you even listening to me? I asked, a desperate edge bleeding into my tone. He sighed. It wasn't a sigh of sympathy. It was a loud, exaggerated exhale of profound annoyance. He finally lifted his head, his slate-gray eyes meeting mine with a coldness that made my breath catch in my throat. Samira, can you just stop? He snapped, his voice dangerously low. I have a multi-million-dollar merger falling apart. The board is breathing down my neck, and I have been putting out fires since 6 a.m. Your conversations, they're just noise right now. It's just endless, irritating background noise. Can you please, for the love of God, just let me work in peace? The words hung in the air, echoing in the cavernous dining room. Just noise. My sister's cancer, my profound terror, my desperate need for my life partner. It was all just a bothersome frequency he wanted to tune out. In movies, this is the moment the wife throws a glass of wine in the husband's face. She screams, she cries, she demands respect. But real life is rarely that cinematic. In real life, trauma often manifests as a terrifying, absolute stillness. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. Something deep inside my chest, the tether that had kept me bound to this man for a decade and a half, simply snapped. It was a clean, surgical break. In that exact fraction of a second, I looked at the man I had vowed to love until death, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, crystalline clarity. If I was just noise, then it was time to turn the volume all the way down, permanently. Okay, I whispered. I stood up, took my untouched plate to the kitchen, scraped the food into the garbage disposal, and walked upstairs. The next morning, the ghosting began. But it didn't start with a sudden disappearance. It started with my complete withdrawal of presence while still inhabiting the same physical space. I became a phantom in my own home. I stopped making his coffee. I stopped asking if he needed his suits dry cleaned. When he spoke to me, asking where his keys were or what the plan was for the weekend, I looked right through him, turned on my heel, and walked away. At first, Jaren found it amusing. "Oh, we're doing the silent treatment? Very mature, Samira," he mocked as he poured himself a drink on Friday evening. "Let me know when you're done throwing your little tantrum." He thought it was a petty punishment. He didn't realize it was an eviction notice. By the second week, his amusement turned into irritation. He would stand in front of me, waving a hand in my face, demanding I speak. I would simply blink, step around him, and leave the room. I had completely detached. Every word I withheld was a brick in the wall I was building between us. But while he thought I was just sulking, I was actually planning the most meticulous, untraceable exit a betrayed wife had ever executed. Planning to vanish from a shared life is a full-time job. You don't realize how deeply intertwined your existence is with another person until you try to untangle the threads without them noticing. I began operating strictly in the shadows. When Jaren was at the office, I was executing a masterclass in covert logistics. I couldn't just pack a suitcase and leave. Jaren was vindictive and highly connected. If I simply moved into an apartment across town, he would make the divorce a living hell, dragging it out in court to drain my resources and punish my defiance. I needed to disappear entirely, forcing him to fight a ghost. My first step was securing my digital and financial independence. I bought a burner phone with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. Using a secure VPN, I established a new email address and began contacting an attorney recommended by a trusted client, a shark named Gregory, who specialized in high net worth, contentious divorces. But to secure my financial future, I needed to know exactly what we had. Jaren had always handled the long-term investments and corporate accounts, patronizingly telling me to focus on my pretty curtains. One night, while Jaren was heavily sedated by a mix of stress and sleeping pills, I slipped into his home office. I had spent weeks subtly observing him type his master password, memorizing the keystrokes. I unlocked his desktop and began digging. I expected to find a few hidden accounts, maybe some offshore investments he was trying to hide from the IRS. What I found was infinitely worse, and it changed the entire trajectory of my escape. Buried deep in a nested folder, disguised as mundane tax documents, was a subfolder labeled CJ Logistics Consulting. I opened the spreadsheets and felt the blood drain from my face. Over the past 14 months, Jaren had been funneling massive amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars out of our joint savings and his company's operational funds, into an external account belonging to a woman named Chloe Jenkins. The payments were categorized as consulting fees, but the sheer volume and irregularity screamed something else. My immediate thought was the classic cliché: an affair. He was funding a lavish lifestyle for a mistress. The rage I thought I had buried flared back to life. He called my grief over my sister noise while he was quietly bankrupting us to play sugar daddy to some woman named Chloe. I pulled out a portable hard drive and copied everything. Every spreadsheet, every bank statement, every email fragment I could find. I was shaking with adrenaline. The discovery of Chloe Jenkins accelerated my timeline. I couldn't just ghost him. I had to ensure I wasn't left holding the bag if his financial discrepancies came to light. I spent the next 10 days systematically erasing myself from the house. I didn't take large items that he would notice immediately. I started small. I packed up my favorite books, my heirloom jewelry, the photo albums containing pictures of my childhood. I rented a secure storage unit in a neighboring county under my maiden name and made trips back and forth while he was at work. I took every single photograph of myself out of the frames scattered around the house, replacing them with generic landscape photos I printed off the internet. I wanted him to wake up one day and realize there was no evidence I had ever existed there. I quietly dissolved my Interior Design LLC, informing my clients I was taking an indefinite sabbatical due to a family medical emergency. I liquidated my personal business accounts, moving the funds into a new, single-name account at a regional bank Jaren had no ties to. I legally granted my sister medical power of attorney and set up a trust to help cover her medical expenses, ensuring Jaren couldn't touch that money, even if he tried. The day of my departure was a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after the night he told me my voice was noise. Jaren was scheduled to fly to Denver for a 3-day logistics conference. I drove him to the airport. It was the first time we had been in a car together in weeks. The silence between us was deafening, thick with his resentment and my hidden anticipation. When I pulled up to the departures curb, he got out, grabbed his suitcase, and leaned down to the window. I hope you're done with this psychotic mute routine by the time I get back, Samira. It's pathetic, he spat, slamming the car door without waiting for a reply. I watched him walk through the sliding glass doors, disappearing into the terminal. I didn't feel a pang of sadness. I felt the overwhelming, euphoric rush of a prisoner watching the warden walk away. I drove back to the house and went into hyperdrive. I packed my remaining clothes, my essential documents, and the hard drive containing his financial secrets into my SUV. I scrubbed the house from top to bottom, removing every stray hair, every fingerprint, every trace of my perfume. I took my wedding ring off and left it sitting precisely in the center of the kitchen island, next to his favorite coffee mug. No note, no explanation, no grand dramatic letter detailing his faults. He didn't want my noise, so I gave him the ultimate, permanent silence. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and dropped my house key down a storm drain on the corner. I got into my car, drove to a designated parking lot, sold the SUV for cash to a dealership I had prearranged a deal with, and boarded a bus headed west. Samira Hunter ceased to exist in Chicago. I became a ghost. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch of a small, weather-beaten cabin I had rented in a remote coastal town in Oregon. The air tasted of salt and pine, a stark contrast to the smog and exhaust of Chicago. My days were spent walking the rocky beaches, reading, and waiting for updates from the private investigator I had hired through my attorney, a sharp, unyielding former detective named Dean Ward. Ghosting Jaren had produced the exact chaotic reaction I had anticipated, but on a much grander scale. According to Dean, Jaren had returned from Denver to an empty house. At first, he thought I was playing a game. He texted furiously, the messages bouncing back from my disconnected number. He called my friends, my sister, anyone who might know where I was. Everyone, briefed by me beforehand, played dumb. "We haven't heard from her," they told him. "We thought she was with you." By day 5, his arrogance fractured into panic. But as Dean dug deeper, a terrifying twist began to unravel, one that proved my ghosting hadn't just been an act of self-preservation. It had inadvertently saved me from federal prison. I was on a video call with Dean on a chilly Thursday morning when the truth finally surfaced. "Samira, you sitting down?" Dean's gritty voice crackled through the laptop speakers. He looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I am. What did you find out about Chloe Jenkins? Is he moving her into the house?" I asked, sipping my black coffee, bracing myself for the cliché confirmation of his infidelity. "There is no Chloe Jenkins," Dean said flatly. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I saw the wire transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars over 14 months. I traced the routing numbers you pulled from his hard drive," Dean explained, leaning closer to his webcam. "Chloe Jenkins is a ghost, just like you. It's a shell corporation registered in Delaware, entirely owned and operated by a holding company tied back to you." My blood ran cold. The mug slipped slightly in my hands. "Me? That's impossible. I never registered anything in Delaware." "I know you didn't," Dean said grimly. "Jaren did. He stole your identity, Samira. He used your social security number, forged your signature, and set up this dummy corporation. He hasn't been having an affair. He's been embezzling millions from his own logistics firm, siphoning the money out through consulting fees paid to this fake entity." I stared at the screen, the horrific reality washing over me. Jaren wasn't just ignoring me, he was setting me up as his fall guy. "Why?" I whispered, my voice trembling for the first time since I left. "His firm is going under. They're about to be audited by the SEC, Dean explained. Jaren's plan was brilliant in a sociopathic way. When the feds came knocking, the paper trail would lead directly to you. He was going to play the devastated, betrayed husband whose greedy wife stole company funds right under his nose to support a secret second life. That's why he was so unbothered by your emotional state. You weren't a wife to him anymore. You were a highly insured scapegoat. The room spun. Every moment of the last year flashed before my eyes. The times he encouraged me to take solo trips, the documents he aggressively pushed in front of my face and told me to just sign, it's just tax stuff. The night he called my voice noise. He didn't care about my sister's cancer or my pain, because in his mind, I was already dead to him. I was just a pawn, moving toward a prison cell. So, where does my disappearing act leave him? I asked, a fierce, protective anger replacing the shock. Dean actually chuckled, a dry, cynical sound. It leaves him completely screwed. By vanishing without a trace, draining your personal accounts, and severing all ties right before the audit, you broke his narrative. A guilty embezzler doesn't leave their wedding ring behind and walk away with nothing. More importantly, we now have the hard drive proving he orchestrated the transfers from his own IP address. I had ghosted him to escape a dead marriage, but in doing so, I had dismantled his elaborate trap. But Jaren wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated from a silent standoff to a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Dean intercepted desperate emails Jaren was sending to my old business contacts, offering massive rewards for any information on my whereabouts. He hired his own private investigators. He was terrified. He needed me back to sign backdated documents, to force me into the frame he had built. One evening, I walked down to the local diner to pick up dinner. The Oregon fog had rolled in thick and heavy, obscuring the streetlights. As I waited for my food, my burner phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number. I know about the storage unit in Naperville. My breath hitched. The storage unit where I had kept my family heirlooms and childhood photos. It was under my maiden name, paid in cash, but somehow, he had found it. The phone buzzed again. I know you took the drive, Samira. Come home. Let's fix this as a family. Or I promise you, what I do next will be so much louder than noise. He was threatening me. He thought he still had power. He thought I was still the quiet, obedient wife who would freeze under pressure. He didn't realize that the woman who left that ring on the kitchen counter was entirely different from the woman he married. I paid for my food, walked back into the dense fog, and dialed Dean's number. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows. It was time to strike back. Dean, I said as soon as he answered. He found the storage unit. He's trying to corner me. Are you safe? We can move you tonight, Dean replied instantly. No, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Don't move me. It's time to send those files to the SEC. Let's burn his world to the ground. The ghost was finally ready to haunt him. Sleep evaded me completely after that text message. The Oregon coast, usually a sanctuary of crashing waves and calming salt air, suddenly felt like an exposed nerve. Jaren had found the storage unit in Naperville. He was closing the distance, utilizing whatever dark, expensive resources his crumbling logistics empire still afforded him. But he had fundamentally miscalculated the situation. He believed he was hunting a frightened, passive wife who had run away in a hysterical fit. He didn't realize he was walking directly into a federal snare. Early the next morning, Dean Ward executed our counteroffensive. Operating from his secure office in Chicago, Dean compiled the thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and forged signatures I had pulled from Jaren's hidden hard drive. He didn't just send them to the local authorities. He bypassed the city entirely and went straight to the top. He transmitted the encrypted dossier to Special Agent Harrison Croft, a notoriously relentless investigator within the Securities and Exchange Commission's White-Collar Crime Division in Washington, D.C. The ensuing fallout was not a slow leak. It was a catastrophic structural collapse. Less than 48 hours after Dean pressed send, Jaren's world shattered. I watched it unfold in real time through updates from Dean and national news alerts on my burner phone. It happened on a Thursday morning at exactly 9:15 a.m. Jaren was in the middle of a high-stakes board meeting, desperately trying to project confidence while his firm bled capital. Without warning, the heavy glass doors of his corporate headquarters were breached. Over 24 federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and SEC logos, flooded the pristine, marble-floored lobby. They seized everything. They confiscated laptops, locked down the corporate servers, and carried out boxes of physical files. When they marched into the boardroom, Jaren was mid-sentence. According to the internal source Dean had cultivated, Jaren's arrogant facade completely dissolved. He stammered, demanding to call his attorney, trying to pull rank on federal investigators who looked at him with utter contempt. They didn't arrest him on the spot. Federal white-collar cases require meticulous grand jury indictments, but they froze every single asset he had access to. His corporate accounts, our joint savings, his offshore contingencies, and most importantly, the dummy accounts under the fake Chloe Jenkins Shell Corporation. Jaren was suddenly a multimillionaire with zero access to capital, trapped in a rapidly tightening legal vice, and he knew exactly who had handed the feds the wrench. Instead of preparing a legal defense, his desperation mutated into a dangerous, obsessive rage directed entirely at me. He needed me. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, if he could just force me back to Chicago, he could coerce me into signing a confession, claiming I had orchestrated the embezzlement to fund a secret life. He needed his scapegoat. To find me, Jaren hired a disgraced former private security contractor named Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was the kind of man who specialized in off-the-books intimidation, a phantom who operated in the gray areas of the law. While the FBI was auditing Jaren's life, Arthur was digging into mine. I had been incredibly careful, but love often creates vulnerabilities that logic cannot patch. My vulnerability was my sister, Sarah. Sarah's breast cancer surgery had been successful, and she was recovering in a specialized post-operative care facility back in Illinois. I had legally severed myself from Jaren, but I couldn't sever myself from her. I had established an anonymous trust to pay for her exorbitant medical bills, using a masked IP address. But when Sarah developed a minor infection requiring a highly specific, rare antibiotic, the facility needed a secondary authorization signature from her medical proxy me. I couldn't risk mailing it, so I utilized an encrypted digital fax service, routing the signature through a localized server in a neighboring Oregon town to bounce the IP. It was a solid plan, but Arthur Pendleton was exceptionally good at his dark trade. He caught a microping from the localized server. He couldn't pinpoint my exact cabin, but he successfully triangulated my location to a 30-mile radius along the remote Tillamook coast. Dean called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with an urgency I had never heard before. "Samira, you need to pack a bag right now," Dean commanded, the sound of typing echoing rapidly in the background of the call. "Pendleton just booked a commercial flight into Portland International for Jaren. They know you're somewhere near Garibaldi. He's coming for you." Panic, cold and sharp, flared in my chest. How did he leave the state? I thought the SEC flagged his passport and restricted his travel. They restricted international travel, but until the grand jury officially indicts him, he's a free citizen domestically, Dean explained, frustration bleeding into his tone. He's desperate, Samira. A man facing 20 years in federal prison, who thinks his wife holds the key to his salvation, is capable of anything. We are extracting you. I have a security team 2 hours away. I walked over to the large bay window of the cabin, staring out at the violent, churning gray waters of the Pacific Ocean. The fog was rolling in, thick and suffocating, much like the silence that used to fill my home in Chicago. I thought about running. I thought about packing my bags and disappearing into another state, changing my name again, becoming a permanent fugitive from a crime I didn't commit. But then I remembered the dining room table. I remembered the cold, dismissive look in his eyes when he told me my profound grief was nothing but irritating noise. I had spent 15 years making myself small so he could feel large. I had vanished to protect myself, but continuing to run meant he still controlled my movements. It meant he still had power. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, unbreakable whisper. "Samira, do not argue with me on this," Dean fired back. "This isn't a game of chess anymore. He's cornered." "Exactly, Dean. He's cornered. And if I run, he will never stop looking. He will harass Sarah. He will spend every last dime he can hide paying men like Pendleton to hunt me. I'm done being hunted." I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. "Call Special Agent Croft. Tell him the architect of his embezzlement case is ready to hand him a recorded, verbal confession on a silver platter. But they have to do it my way." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. When Dean finally spoke, a hint of dark respect laced his words. "What exactly are you planning, Samira?" "I'm going to give my husband the conversation he's been dying to have." The staging ground was a dilapidated, sea-battered diner perched on the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking the ocean, roughly 5 miles from my cabin. It was a local spot, usually empty by late afternoon, smelling permanently of old frying oil and stale coffee. Special Agent Harrison Croft had flown in on a red-eye flight, accompanied by a discreet team of undercover federal agents and local Oregon state troopers. They had rigged the diner flawlessly. Tiny, high-definition audio and visual recorders were embedded in the salt shakers, the overhead light fixtures, and the worn vinyl of the corner booth. I was wearing a highly sensitive wire taped securely against my ribs, hidden beneath a thick, woolen fisherman's sweater. Croft, a tall, pragmatic man with calculating eyes, had given me explicit instructions. Keep him talking. Let him threaten you. Let him reference the fake corporation. The moment he explicitly admits to forging your signature to defraud the company, say the safety word: closure. I sat in the back booth, a cold cup of black coffee resting in front of me. Outside, the coastal rain had begun to fall in heavy, relentless sheets, obscuring the unmarked sedans parked strategically out of sight. At 4:15 p.m., the rusted bell above the diner door jingled violently. Jaren walked in. The sight of him sent a bizarre shockwave through my system. He looked entirely alien. Gone was the impeccably tailored Armani suit, the perfectly coiffed hair, and the aura of untouchable arrogance. He was wearing a rumpled, rain-soaked trench coat. His face was covered in thick, unkempt stubble, and his slate-gray eyes, usually so cold and composed, were bloodshot and darting frantically around the empty diner. He looked exactly like what he was, a desperate, hunted criminal. He spotted me in the corner. For a brief second, a flash of pure, unadulterated venom crossed his face, quickly replaced by a sickening, manufactured smile. He slid into the booth across from me. "Samira," he breathed, his voice hoarse. He reached across the sticky Formica table, attempting to grab my hands. I pulled them back, resting them firmly in my lap. "You're hard to find, darling," he continued, trying to maintain a conversational tone that completely failed to mask his underlying panic. "This little vacation of yours, it's gone on long enough. You've made your point. I'm sorry about the fight. I'm sorry I was insensitive about Sarah, but we need to go home now. Things at the firm have gotten complicated." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. I utilized the exact same tactic I had used during my final weeks in Chicago. I gave him nothing. No emotion, no validation, no response. I just looked through him. His manufactured smile twitched and collapsed. The charm vanished, replaced by the vicious corporate shark I knew all too well. "Stop looking at me like that," he hissed, leaning over the table, his voice dropping to a harsh, dangerous whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Taking that hard drive? Handing those files to the SEC? You are destroying our life, Samira. You are destroying everything I built." "You built it on a lie, Jaren," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You built it on stolen money." "It wasn't stolen!" he fired back, slamming a fist onto the table, rattling the coffee cups. He checked himself, glancing at the apathetic teenager working the counter who was secretly an undercover federal agent. Jaren lowered his voice again. It was a temporary reallocation of funds. The firm was facing a liquidity crisis. I had to move the money to keep the board from panicking. It was a strategic maneuver. By funneling millions into a shell company named Chloe Jenkins, I asked coolly, "A company registered in my name?" Jaren scoffed, a desperate, ugly sound. "Oh, please, don't play the naive housewife with me. You benefited from that money just as much as I did. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. You spent it just as freely." "I didn't know where it came from," I stated flatly, ensuring my denial was loud and clear for the microphone taped to my chest. "I didn't sign those incorporation documents in Delaware. Jaren, you stole my identity. You forged my signature." Jaren leaned back, rubbing a hand aggressively over his face. He was unraveling, losing his grip on the narrative. He resorted to the only tactic he had left: extortion. "Listen to me very carefully, Samira," he whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "I know about the trust fund you set up for Sarah's medical bills. I know she needs another round of aggressive chemotherapy. If I go down, the feds freeze everything. They claw back every dime I ever earned. including the money you filtered into that trust. Your sister's treatment stops tomorrow. She dies, Samira. She dies because you wanted to play the righteous victim. My blood ran like ice water. He was truly a monster, willing to weaponize my dying sister to save his own skin. But he was also bluffing, and we both knew it. The trust was funded with my personal design firm income, Jaren. Clean money. The SEC already cleared it, I said softly. His eyes widened in shock. I had taken away his final piece of leverage. You vicious, he trailed off, his face contorting with absolute rage. You think you've won? You think you can just walk away from me? I am the only reason you are anything. I will drag you down with me. I will testify that you orchestrated the entire Chloe Jenkins account. I will tell the grand jury that you demanded the money, that you forged the signatures, and I was just trying to protect my greedy wife. It's your word against mine, and I have Arthur Pendleton on payroll to fabricate whatever evidence I need. There it is, I thought. The explicit threat, the admission of the fraud structure, and his intent to commit perjury and witness tampering. I looked at the man who had dismissed 15 years of my devotion as background noise. I felt absolutely no pity for the pathetic, broken creature sitting across from me. You really thought I was just going to sit quietly and take the fall for your embezzlement, didn't you? I asked, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying clarity. You thought my voice didn't matter. Well, Jaren, I think it's time we finally get some closure. The word hung in the air. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Jaren blinked, confused by the sudden finality in my tone. Then, the diner exploded into action. The front doors were kicked open with a deafening crash. The teenager behind the counter vaulted over the register, drawing a sidearm. Special Agent Croft and 4 heavily armed troopers swarmed the booth in a matter of milliseconds. Jaren Hunter, keep your hands exactly where they are. FBI, do not move, Croft bellowed, his weapon trained directly on Jaren's chest. Jaren froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. He slowly raised his hands. His eyes locked on mine in absolute horror as the realization of what had just happened finally crushed him. Samira, he whimpered, a pathetic, high-pitched sound. Samira, please. Tell them. Stand up, Mr. Hunter. Hands behind your back, a trooper barked, roughly hauling Jaren out of the booth. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly through the diner. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. As they marched him toward the exit, he twisted his neck, looking back at me with wild, pleading eyes. He was screaming my name, begging me to help him, begging me to speak to him. I sat completely still, sipping my now cold coffee. I watched him being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle, his life permanently destroyed by his own arrogance. I didn't say a single word. I let him drown in my silence. The aftermath of Jaren's arrest was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media frenzy. The spectacular collapse of his logistics firm made national headlines. Faced with the insurmountable mountain of evidence I had provided, combined with the audio recording from the diner, where he explicitly confessed to wire fraud, identity theft, and witness tampering, his high-priced defense attorneys immediately sought a plea deal. Jaren Hunter was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. With Croft and the SEC's help, I was completely exonerated. My divorce was expedited through the courts. Because Jaren's assets were seized to pay restitution to his defrauded partners, I didn't walk away with millions, but I walked away with my freedom, my unblemished reputation, and the clean money from my own business. I moved Sarah out to Oregon once she was strong enough to travel. The coastal air did wonders for her recovery. I reopened my interior design firm, catering to clients who appreciated quiet, serene spaces that felt like sanctuaries rather than showpieces. People often ask me how I found the courage to disappear so completely, to ghost a man I had spent a decade and a half building a life with. They think it requires a loud, dramatic explosion of anger, but true power rarely announces itself. True power is recognizing when your presence is no longer valued, and having the profound self-respect to simply remove it. Jaren told me my voice was just irritating noise. He wanted silence so he could focus on his empire of lies. In the end, I gave him exactly what he asked for, and that silence was the loudest, most devastating sound he would ever hear. When someone treats your presence like an inconvenience, Sometimes the most powerful response is to give them the absolute absence they asked for. Samira's story proves that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's the ultimate strategy for survival. Have you ever had to walk away completely to protect your peace? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life survival stories.